ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and stay right there, please. I'm sick, I don't want you to get this. But this does bring me to an interesting lesson for today that I've had people ask questions about. Usually comes up in combination of other things, but basically, why don't characters in role-playing games ever get sick? And we know that there are some attacks that can cause disease. For example, the mummy's curse, mummy rot, exists kind of like a disease. And lycanthropy is kind of like a disease, although it's also more of a curse. But they're really, unless it's central to a plot point, like the old video game Neverwinter Nights, the original version. When that came out, it was centered around a magic-resistant disease that was attacking the town of Neverwinter, which you eventually solved how it got there and the story behind it, which led to a truly kind of a tragic descent of events. But characters generally don't get sick. Why is that? And should they? Are we missing something here? Ultimately, the answer to that is generally, your characters do get sick. Your characters can get sick all the time. It happens. But when they get sick, they're going to get sick with things like a cold, like I have. They might get sick with a flu or something like that. They might get sick with any number of minor ailments along the way. There are just a number of things that make you miserable. Absolutely miserable. Ugh. Almost had it. But when it comes to clashes of life and death, generally your heroic characters are just a notch above that. If you've ever been cautioned, you get lots of rest, take care of yourself or you're going to get pneumonia, you're going to get something worse. Your characters, oftentimes you can assume based on their constitution, will occasionally have minor nagging ailments. If you've ever seen a movie, there's a pretty good chance that along the course of the shooting of that movie, one or more of the people on that scene got sick. But you can't tell because makeup is a wonderful thing, and they're actors. They can act healthy even when they're sick. It's harder when your nose is running like a faucet and you have an intermittent cough, but that's why they take extra shots. Because if you can't muffle it for one scene, they just shoot it over again. Hopefully you can hang in a bit better the next time. And, that's just something that's out of the control of the people who are in the movie. Well, the same thing works when you're, adventuring. Sometimes you're going to have a cold. Sometimes you're going to have some sort of illness. Considering some of the places that adventurers travel to, they're probably a little more likely to get sick from a variety of things, tromping around in sewers, exposing themselves to freezing temperatures, or really hot, humid temperatures. Nuisance creatures like mosquitoes that carry disease. Those are the kind of things that adventurers come into contact with a relatively high amount of the time, depending on what they do. So it's not unusual to think that your character might have a minor sickness from time to time. But like a lot of things in role-playing games, that's generally swept under the rug. It's not significant enough to really bear any kind of statistical change or penalty or anything like that. It's also generally assumed that the characters will have the sense to take care of things to their level best. So, if it means that, I've got a cold, even though my player is not saying that, I'm trying to keep an extra layer on or maybe try to keep extra dry for a particular scenario, it's not unreasonable to believe that the character would do that. It's just some of those things that are glossed over details in the certain amount of abstraction that every role-playing game generally has to have. Can you have a game that simulates minor diseases like colds and flus and whatnot with a sliding scale that goes up to more dangerous diseases like whooping cough or pertussis, strep throat, things like that that really start to get somewhat serious, all the way up to things like pneumonia or, that could be potentially life-threatening, sure you can. It all depends on what you feel comfortable with and what helps your game. If it's something that helps your game, like you're fine with the adventure being held up for a couple of days while your lead fighter fights off a cold, and the rest of the group is okay with just kind of hanging around waiting for him to get better, cool. But war doesn't wait on a single person. It doesn't even wait on a large number of people in the side are sick. If there's a battle to be fought, you gotta fight. And sometimes that means you're not going to be 100%. That means that you're going to be a little sick. But in life and death situations, you grab your sword, you put on your armor, you hold your shield tight, and you fight to the best of your ability. If it's not 100%, it's as close as you can get. And that's really what's important, that you're there and that you're doing your job, more so than if you're feeling 100%. Few people feel 100% all the time anyhow. So, worrying about little things like nagging back strains or after resting, maybe you slept on a bedroll on top of a stone floor in a dungeon. I guarantee you're going to be a little bit sore after that. Bedrolls aren't thick mattresses. So unless you're really used to that kind of hardship, your average person is going to wake up stiff, sore. But we just kind of gloss it over because it's a convention. It's part of the game. And it's just relatively okay. The same question for that, again, could be, don't characters ever go to the bathroom? Same thing. Of course they do. They're alive, therefore they eat and they excrete. But we're discreet about how they excrete. They take care of it in between the gaps of the story. It's not something you need to draw attention to, although as a game master I have occasionally chanced an encounter, either pre-planned or random, putting the character in a situation like, well, you go off to relieve yourself and then this happens. Just because maybe it's a better encounter when one person is facing it alone and gives them an opportunity to role play, or maybe puts them in a chance encounter that might be suboptimal and let them have to work it out with the rest of the group. That's part of playing in a role playing game sometimes, but it's not something that really needs to be dwelled upon unless you are a real stickler for details. It can all just be easily glossed over. Just assume your characters do it. And then, you move on. The same thing goes with just about any part of your character's life that you don't want to detail. For instance, we can suspect that adventurers are going to kind of be like athletes. They will accrue a certain amount of fame. And that fame may open certain doors for them, which may include things like, fraternization with members of, that fit their tastes as far as, company goes. You don't need to dwell on any of that if you don't want to. You can assume your character is going to go about living their life and sometimes doing things that aren't important in the grand story of things, so they're just kind of glossed over. Yeah, your fighter may absolutely be a heartthrob that the women throw themselves at, but if nobody feels comfortable with describing the details about those amorous relationships that might come about from being a well-recognized hero and generally good-looking person, then you never really need to. It can still happen, the character can still be, doing various things that just don't matter in terms of the story, and that's fine. Sorry, bards, you don't necessarily deserve your own chapter related to your romantic exploits, or, things of that nature. All those things can easily be just swept under the rug as things that happen in their character's life that don't need to get into the story. And again, if you have a hard time believing that or following that, just look at an adventure movie like Conan. When Conan is romantically engaged, none of it really takes place on camera. Just events that lead up to it to suggest what would happen after that point. Do you ever see Conan poop? No. He does, but it's not on screen because you don't need to see that. It's not part of the adventure. It's not important to the story. So whenever you see them, lounge, recline, being at liberty, that's only shown when it serves to contrast and build the character. So the time after their successful haul, where they're getting all the gear, and then in the very first movie, where Conan goes and gets drunk, and that's because it shows the type of character that Conan is. He's barbaric. When he gets luxury, he blows it all right away because he doesn't have concepts of security and saving. He spends it like a barbarian. And that builds the character, so we understand the character more. Could we assume that happens whenever he comes into town? Do we ever really keep track of how much money Conan has? No. We just kind of assume that all happens. So it seems to make sense. Unless, of course, you're detailing things for a purpose in a role-playing game. There's a lot of things, like sickness, that you could sweep under the rug. If adventure called me right now to pick up my sword and go do something that I needed to do to save lives or whatever, just because I'm sick, I would still do it. It would suck, possibly. And if it called me to go out into a driving rain or something, even though I'm sick, yeah, I'd be even the more miserable. But would I do? Well, it depends on what it is. I'm not an adventurer by trade, but, spark burned. So, yeah, that's basically my short sum up on how disease can impact role-playing games. And is it there? Yes. Unless for some reason you have a game world where there's an expectation that characters will never get sick. Once you have a cleric in your group up to a certain level, you could reasonably accept that at some point they would learn the spell Cure Disease, and if you had a cold, the cleric would come up and, okay, your cold's gone. It's just one of the perks for traveling with me, and I appreciate all the times that you've stepped in front of danger to save my life, so here you go. You no longer have to worry about colds when you're with me. Awesome. I can think right now, gosh, I wish I had a high-level cleric friend. But I don't, and I have to get over this cold the old-fashioned way. So, that being said, thanks for coming. Thanks for showing up for this lesson. I hope this answers some of those questions. Now, of course, if you choose that, the stuff that I just mentioned doesn't necessarily have to apply, it certainly doesn't have to. If you have a game that you want to relay, Tor, you're feeling that massive sandwich you ate 10 hours ago. It's rumbling down there. You better go find someplace to take care of that because you rolled for it or what have you. You could go ahead, have fun. But for people like me, I like cinematic reality where things that don't happen still happen, but just off screen. So, thank you again. This has been another lesson from me, the Dungeon Tutor. And I hope that it genuinely helps and entertains you with my misfortune. But until next time, roll some dice, play some games, have some fun, stay safe and healthy if you can. And until the next lesson, I have been Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. Thank you and farewell.